So the first talk is from Carrie Pike. At last year's meeting, we heard from Tony D'Amato about assisted migration and some of the considerations associated with using plants that are not necessarily local ecotypes. And I asked Carrie to come and help us continue that conversation. Carrie Pike is a geneticist and forest regeneration specialist with the U.S. Forest Service. She provides technical assistance in forest regeneration and specializes in tree resistance breeding, seed collection and seed source selection, biodiversity conservation, and tree nursery production. She recently moved to Vermont from Indiana, so we're lucky to have her here. And the title of her talk is Sourcing Seed in an Uncertain Climate, Lessons from Common Garden Studies. Thanks, Carrie. Let's get you set up here. There, looks like right here. And let me just
put it
in presenter mode. Okay.
Okay.
Up.
Yep. I think
Okay.
that's it. All right. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. I moved here from the cornfields of Indiana. I'm not from Indiana. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Before Indiana, I did 17 years at the University of Minnesota up at the Cloquet Forestry Center. So that's really where I learned about genetics and tree breeding, doing conifer breeding. But I am originally from Long Island. So I've come back home to Vermont and got the warm welcome of a very cold winter because I'm a skier, so I'm really happy to be here. So the program, I work for the Forest Service. I cover the entire eastern region, which is a 20-state region from Minnesota, Maine, Maryland to Missouri. And I'm with the State Private and Tribal Forestry Deputy area. So the Forest Service is kind of a beast. It's about 30,000 people divided into 3 deputy areas. Most people are hooked to a national forest. I am not. Some folks do research, I don't. I'm in the other one. We work with partners. Specifically, I work with a lot of the state nurseries, tribal nurseries, and any nursery that needs help. We have a website. I am responsible for the I Love Baby Tree stickers that you saw at the registration table. They have our website, rngr.net. We pronounce it Ringer. It goes by other pronunciations. But it's a national team dedicated to nurseries and reforestation and genetics. So we don't care who you work for, where you work. We're not afraid to cross lines and geographies to provide technical and financial assistance. So I'm glad that Sean reminded me that this was prompted by an assisted migration talk. So we know climate change. The one thing we can expect is that we don't know what's really going to happen, but we know things are going to change. And so to me, it's all about just creating a buffer system in terms of your genetics for your tree planting and restoration projects. And it's kind of intimidating, I will say, especially if we're focused here on local and getting Vermont seed, which is great, and I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't do that. But when you start seeing headlines like this, it's like, oh boy, I better be doing something about it. And it's intimidating. We don't have good nursery infrastructure in the Northeast. And coming from the Midwest, working with these, bigger nurseries, our problem was mostly that there wasn't enough seed. There were plenty of nurseries that weren't growing enough. But I discovered here in New England that is not the case. So just because for the last 20, 30 years, reforestation has not been a popular thing in New England. It was mostly in Maine. They relied a lot on natural regeneration, and that is changing quickly, especially with these conversations about assisted migration. Now, I promise, I am not getting get into the weeds on any genetics, although I can. I do have a Tree Improvement 101 webinar online free if you really want to nerd out with me. I love nerding out on stuff. But really, it is an intimidating space. What do? We just want to plant trees. So what I like to do is just drill this down to what are the basics, what are the things that are happening, what are the stresses, and then how do we match seed sources to them? Well, the biggest stress that we were seeing in the Midwest is these weird early spring frosts. And they're especially tough on trees like white spruce, which is the largest commercial species in Canada, that like to come out of the blocks really early. They're sprinters. They come out early, they're vulnerable to spring frosts. And so that's a big deal. Now, the midwinter cold temperatures that we've seen a lot of this year, again, I'm happy about this, is a problem not for our native local seed sources, but if you are moving material from several hundred miles to the south, it may not be hardy enough to handle those nadir low winter temperatures that you get. So those midwinter frosts may become a problem. In addition, as we're moving material around, if it's not hardy, it'll get nuked. Early fall frost, I don't see this as much. A lot of our northern conifers and northern trees, they're kind of shutting down in time, but this is a problem in species with indeterminate growth. They just keep growing, they don't stop, they don't set a bud like spruce, they just keep growing. So this can be a problem, especially as you're moving seed sources around. Drought's a big problem. I know you got floods here too, but drought is a problem, especially during the seedling stage. And so we buffer that by planting really good quality stock that's got lots and lots of root tips on it. You don't want just a stringy tree. You want something with a really bulky root system. It's more likely to just get the ground and start getting its roots out to find water. Excessive midsummer heat during periods of drought. Again, this is a problem on plants, seedlings, and large trees. Okay, wildfires, I know, I'm in Vermont, I'm not in Minnesota anymore, so that's what the fire picture is, but it is a problem and could become a problem. It is a much bigger deal in the Midwest. Flooding, of course, we're here Watershed meeting and seasonally high water levels. So not only you need to make sure you're planting the right species. You know if you're near a river, there's gonna be flooding, you gotta plant trees that can handle those conditions. Incidentally, the picture on the top left is a fresh body of water. It is not Lake Champlain, it is Lake Superior in northern Minnesota. Okay, so I am gonna go down a rabbit hole with you about the difference between plasticity and adaptations. Why, I don't know. I just felt this was a good place to have this conversation. So plasticity, though, when you're thinking about seed sourcing, it's the ability of a tree to develop into several possible phenotypes depending on the environment. So it's a tree being a tree. It's in its environment. So this jack pine here on the right is growing really, really tall and straight. I mean, for a jack pine, that's a nice looking timber tree. Why is it growing so straight? Because the neighbors are 8 feet away, and it's growing up towards the sun. That's plasticity. So if a neighbor tree falls, there's a gap. Trees, you'll notice in hardwood forests very often a tree falls and you don't really notice it very much in a few years because the other crowns kind of fill in. That's plasticity. It's kind of hardwired in the tree. It's very sort of species-based, but it's also connected to health and vigor. A healthy tree will be able to do more changing and movement within the place it is parked than a tree that's really dying and struggling. And so to contrast this lovely jack pine, here's a butternut in Charlotte Park. Look at the form. This is like a big, happy, open-grown tree. This is an example of plasticity. Because it's open-grown, it wasn't competing for sun. If you collect nuts from that and plant them, they're not going to look like this tree unless it's grown in a similar type of condition. So there's a lot of variation that happens just with plasticity that if you're using local seed, as long as the stock is healthy, you will get quite a bit of plasticity in your seed sources. So the word adaptable, I nerd out on adaptability because I've studied evolution and genetics, and we overuse this term. When we say a tree species is adaptable in a climate change sense, it means that it can survive perturbation. So if you're planting a swamp white oak near water, it means as you get seasonal flooding, it can handle it. It's designed for that. But adaptable also means there's sufficient genetic diversity to evolve. And this is where I get mad because evolution is not one generation, it's many generations. So what we're doing is setting up our forests, our restoration projects to succeed without us. So as we plant trees, these trees may not be the end game. We're hoping they produce progeny and they continue to evolve to whatever climate is going to get thrown at them. And so this is really what adaptation is, and this is why genetic diversity of our seed sources is important. Now, I'm not going to go back to this, but what makes a forest adaptable in a climate change sense? So let's go up one level. After the slide, I'm not going to talk about this again. But really what this means is that ecosystem services are maintained, even if the species that you plant or the dominant species or even the codominant species gets knocked out. How would this happen? Well, this is a black ash swamp in northern Minnesota. Emerald ash borer is coming. Look at that slide. Those are all black ash trees. This is Tony D'Amato's work in Minnesota. What happens when those go? That is going to be replaced by a grassland. Very different ecosystem set of services in that area. And we are very worried about that in the lake states because our native people rely on wild rice paddies that are very dependent on water levels. The ash goes, the water levels go up, the rice dies. This is a very important feature for them. So when we talk about forests being adaptable, this is an example of a forest that's going to have trouble that's not adaptable. So Tony and his researchers are planting other trees in there to see what can also survive. Again, in this case, we're increasing the species diversity, but also we need to also be thinking about the seed sourcing. So I'm not going to talk about forest level structural complexity. That's Tony's wheelhouse, not mine. So the adapt. So there are a number of ways we use this term adapt. One is as a verb. So adapting is an evolutionary process leading to organism fitness in its environment. We also use adaptation as a noun. So an adaptation is a phenotype that resulted from natural selection. And it's also used as an adjective, an adaptive trait. This is a type of trait that plays a functional role. So I'll give you an example, bark thickness. For fire, not a big deal in Vermont, but a big deal in Minnesota. But it also must be under genetic control. So plasticity is typically not under genetic control. Adaptive traits are by definition. So populations, as you're planting trees or doing restoration, you're creating a population. They will evolve if and only if they, one, have genetic diversity, they've got desirable traits that are under heritable control. So the whole goal of assisted migration is to enhance that genetic diversity, bring in a genetic buffer. We don't know what nature is going to do, but if we provide enough genetic material in our plantings, and this is what assisted migration is trying to do, we are hoping we have a buffer so that we will maintain a forest. The end goal of assisted migration is keeping a forest where there was forest, no matter what nature throws at it. Okay, enough on that. Common gardens. So I did a lot of my career at the Cloquet Forestry Center in northern Minnesota, you betcha. And they did a lot of common garden provenance trial research. If you ever get up to Cloquet and visit the Forestry Center, you can see these are all in one part of the forest. You can visit red pine, Scots pine, jack pine, white spruce. They're all together. It's really cool. The Forest Service has a history of installing these because we work very well across states. These require a lot of partners. So a provenance trial is the one I'm going to talk about. There are other kinds of common gardens. Provenance trial just means that the provenance is tracked, and I'll show you examples. So we collect seed from multiple locations. It could be from across a region. It could be across a geographic range, and they plant them in common gardens. So you take all these seed sources, you stick them together. So the difference is from one to the next, a seed source from Alaska, a seed source from Minnesota, is the genetics. And so it begins to highlight the genetic differences that are both adaptive and some of them are plastic. These were set up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s before climate change was on our radar. They're very cool studies. And so now we're looking at them like, oh, wow, we can use these for climate change. So they are increasingly more valuable than they ever were back when they were set up. They're set up to answer a different set of questions. So the types of questions we can ask: how does a seed source from Alaska grow next to Minnesota? How far can you move seed before the growth starts to fall off? You can quantify this with a regression. How does a seed source perform in a novel climate? We can answer this question. What are the climatic factors that influence growth and survival? These are big studies, usually thousands of trees at one site, and then you have many sites. So you have huge data sets, and if you've done any genetics and statistics, you know multivariate is really fun, except when it isn't. So example here, this is a range-wide black spruce provenance trial. The top picture is northern Minnesota. It is replicated south of St. Paul, south of the range of black spruce. We measured both of them and gave the data to Canada, and they did an analysis on it. The other thing these have been really useful for is finding out, are there any provenances that just grow really good trees? And turns out with white spruce, the Ottawa Valley of Ontario has the best seed source for anywhere. So if you plant Ottawa Valley, selections of Ottawa Valley in Minnesota, they outgrow the local sources. That's an Ottawa Valley seed source by that stake, where the other ones are quite a bit smaller. If you plant them in Alberta, they outgrow the local sources, BC, everywhere. Why? We have no idea. And I did a PhD on it, and I still don't know. So that's what these were set up for. We've identified areas that just grow really good seed sources. We did learn also that growth patterns are clinal. So that means that they're not ecotypic. I'll go down that rabbit hole in a second, but it means that as you're going across the geographic range, you're going to see changes that are very gradual from one population to next. They're almost hard to tell apart. As you go from one extreme to the other, Alaska to Minnesota, they look different. But across that range, that gradient, they're very similar. So I'm going to show you Jack Pine provenance trial data and how this has been used. This is set up in the 1940s. It's in Cloquet, which I know you don't know Cloquet. It's right there at the star. This one had 25 provenances in one common garden. I know you can't see this well, but if you look at this, it's ranked in order of bark thickness. Who cares about bark thickness? Bark thickness matters if you're on the western range edge of Jack Pine because of fire pressure. So in Hinckley, Minnesota, which is on a prairie ecotone, it had the thickest bark. And if you go down to New Brunswick and Maine, at the bottom of that list, it had the thinnest bark. So bark thickness is an adaptive trait. And so this is one example. So you can do growth, height and diameter, or you can do things like bark thickness. And this is how these have been utilized to understand the genetics of these species. I really like this slide because it's an older publication from 2004, but it's a really neat shot. So the green dots on that map are all the collections they made. So somebody went around to each green dot and collected a bunch of black spruce seeds, and they planted them at all the stars. And so those 2 stars in Minnesota were the ones, one in St. Paul, one in Grand Rapids, that we helped measure. And one thing that came out of that study is that monthly mean temperature, so they were able to take, this is multivariate statistics. They took all these weather variables and were able to narrow it down to the ones that contributed the most, that explained the most variation. And it was monthly, it was mean temperatures, low temperatures explained the variation. This is why hardiness zones are important to pay attention to, because this is what the data is telling us for black spruce. Precipitation hardly mattered, which surprised me for black spruce, because it's in a lowland, it likes water, it didn't matter. So this is the type of data that is, when we created the seed zones in 2018, we were looking at this type of data. So February minimum temperatures consistently explained the most variability among the provenances, range-wide. Okay, but we've done this for hardwoods, not as well, because of course spruce is a really big deal in Canada. So for black cherry, black walnut, the blue squares are the common gardens, the red dots are the seed sources. So there aren't that many common gardens, and they tend to be like in the middle of the range because these are really expensive to put in, and you don't want to put it on an edge where it's going to fail. So unfortunately, the data we get is, kind of safely within the center of the range. We also have them for northern red oak. This one bothers me because if you look at all those blue dots or the blue squares, they're all in like the same latitude. Okay, so we do the best we can, but it's still useful data. So from these, this is published in 2019. Genetic and phenotypic differences vary on a cline for all of them. Some of the clines are sharper than others, meaning they're more sensitive to seed transfer. But what we don't see in trees, and you'll see this in plants but not trees, are ecotypic differences. So within a site, a tree growing on an upland, like up on a ridge, a tree grown by the watershed or right by the river, genetically are going to be roughly the same. Like if you collected seed from both of them, they'll be genetically similar. The difference is plasticity. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't have any paper copies. This was a manual that I helped create. It was published in 2024. It is online, and we will share all the links out. I'll get them an email from Sean. I went through all the genetics literature, like Laura Leitis' work at Penn State, all of the old literature, and put everything, summarize it into this document. What do we know about moving seed for our major species that we have subjected to provenance trials and population genetic studies? So for example, this is black walnut. This is Purdue One's favorite tree. This is the Purdue One clone. It grows big and straight. Black walnut is a very big deal in Indiana because it's very, very high timber value. So each tree, these were all published in Tree Planters Notes and put together in this guidebook. We have a summary of the genetics, like is the diversity high or is it low? Conant seed traits, insect and disease problems, palatability to browse. Yes, it matters if a deer is going to eat your trees. You need to know that ahead of time. Maximum transfer distances. These numbers are really wishy-washy. It was very hard to come up with these because we haven't done really good regressions on most of them. Range expansion potential, things you need to think about. So the population genetics literature is really fun. I don't have time. I'm just going to show you. This is one thing we can do. This looks like that provenance trial map because there are collections from all across the range. This is eastern hemlock. But instead of collecting seed, it's a needle or a bunch of needles. And they do a genomic analysis on it. They look for markers where there's a lot of genetic variation, and they can then relate that genetic variation to the origin, and you can begin to tell the ancestral story, the glacial refugees of each of these species that have been subject to this. It's really, really fun and really cool. So they use this one to figure out that all the genetic diversity for eastern hemlock is in western North Carolina. As you get away from that, it gets more and more dilute. So we know with northern red oak, this is kind of a summary from one of the chapters. I don't have time to go through all of them. Again, it is online. Genetic diversity is very, very high because it readily hybridizes with other species in the red oak group. Here in Vermont, you mostly have Quercus rubra, but if you go to Indiana, you got a whole pile of other red oaks. You've got black oak, you've got pin oak, and they can hybridize scarlet oak. So they do, all this hybridization leads to an excessive amount of genetic variation. So it's considered a climate change winner. It's tolerant to long distance transfers. It had a very flat cline, so you can move it quite a bit. And what are the major pests and pathogens? Oak wilt is becoming a bigger problem in parts of the Midwest. I hope it doesn't come here. The bookend to that is red spruce, which I know is near and dear to everyone's heart in Vermont. We don't have it in the Midwest. It kind of peters out somewhere in Pennsylvania. Genetic diversity is quite low. It does readily hybridize with black spruce. This is Steve Keller's current work. It's active research that creates these introgression zones. So the tolerance to seed transfer, it's kind of meh in the middle somewhere. I mean, again, like all trees, it tolerates couple hundred miles, but just sort of depends where in the range you are. We consider it vulnerable to climate change, which is why Steve has been able to get a fair bit of grant money to study red spruce. And the biggest concern for me is it's the southern range edge populations, those that occur down in Georgia. Places like that in the southern Alps are at risk of extirpation. So what do we know from all of these? Trees are prolific at dispersing pollen and seed across the landscape. This is good for us, so you don't have to overthink your seed sourcing. If you're doing local and you're getting a good diverse group from a bunch of different mothers, you're probably doing just fine. Genetic diversity is clinal. We see gradual differences in phenotype across the range. It's not abrupt, so you don't have to, if it's coming from Pennsylvania, I look at the hardiness zones to match it up, and I'll get to that in a second. We know that so trees can tolerate 100 to 200 miles without too much problem. So if you need to go to southern Vermont, you're fine for seed sourcing. 100 to 200 miles is generally a very safe bet. Black walnut, though, if you move it more than 200 miles north, the hardiness falls apart. So black walnut is very sensitive. So we know that the baseline genetic diversity varies. So incidentally, yellow birch has a very, very high amount of genetic diversity. It's a hexaploid. It has 6 sets of chromosomes, like who knew? Elm is a tetraploid, 4 sets of chromosomes. So folks who work on loblolly pine, which is a diploid, are like, oh, you poor hardwood people. So I'm gonna go over, I know that was a lot, I'm gonna go over some tools that are available. Again, we'll send you links to these. The Climate Change Atlas has lists of species, so if you're looking for a species, you wonder how vulnerable it is, they do these vulnerability assessments. I'll show you in a second. The eastern seed zones, if you want to know where seed came from and you want to define the origin, I'll talk about that in a second. There's the seed lot selection tool, if you really want to nerd out and find climate analogs that match specific projections in climate, you can go there. The seed transfer guidebook I showed you. There is a new tree planting guide for New England. I tried to remember them this morning. I could not get into Spear Street. I'm sorry. It's online. I will leave copies with Sean. They'll be at Spear Street if you would like copies of them. It was just printed a few months ago. So the Climate Change Atlas, has anybody used this before? Some, not many. Okay, so apparently the website's going to change. So I will make sure Sean gets the new link, but it'll be roughly the same. We've actually added Western species to it, which is very exciting. But you can use this, so what you can see here is a map. This is for white spruce. They show you the Little's range lines, the geographic range. They show you the darker greens and blues on that map show like how densely the populations are. So you can see roughly where they are. And they focus on, so this is a focus on species-specific traits, not so much on within species, but this is like overall, these are the vulnerabilities for the species. But you have to interpret it with care. You may say that, whoa, northern red oak's a climate change winner and white spruce is a loser. But when you have a deer problem, you're going to be planting spruce because they're going to eat your oak. So you have to interpret all this guidance with care based on what you know about your local issues. Now, I was the lead on the Eastern Seed Collection Zones. There's the website. That is not changing anytime soon. Better not. So we did this. I had a whole team of people working on this. We had let's see, did I have Kentucky? Yeah, there's Kentucky. We had a seed zone summit in Kentucky in 2018. We developed these because there were no seed zones for the East that anybody wanted to use. So what we did, we took those hardiness zones, again, back to that black spruce study. Turns out, same thing with southern pines, hardiness zone explains most of the genetic variation in southern pines and black spruce and most of our species. So we took those hardiness zones. We snapped them to county lines. Why? Because seed collectors will tell you the county they got the seed, but they will not tell you anything else. So we decided to use counties as a minimum geographic unit. But with the problem with hardiness zones, if you looked at a hardiness zone map, they're like these lines that go across the page, and we needed these north-south breaks because we don't think it's okay to move them, 1,000 miles. So we got the ecoregions, the Bailey's ecoregions, snapped those to county lines, and then we overlaid the polygons, the hardiness zone polygons and those Bailey's ecoregion polygons to create this map. It is online. It's through ArcGIS. It's public right now. So what you can see, though, like where that 28 is in Kentucky, see that turquoise blue goes across southern Illinois and southern Missouri. You can move seed. That's all the same hardiness zone. So you can move seed across those 3 states. You don't have to feel bad about it. You do have to pay attention, though. Like in Vermont, you can see, I think I zoom in. Yeah. In Vermont, you can see on the left-hand map that from the one side of Lake Champlain is different from the other. I don't know. But what you can do on the website is download. You can download for each seed zone. You can look at the hardiness zone, and then you can go to the hardiness zone you want to go to. But some of those divisions are ecoregion, which is based on some of its altitude. It factors in some rainfall. It's a little rough. But you can always look at the hardy zone because that's the most important feature as far as seed movement. So the goal of this is to give you a way to define what is local. Like, what is my local hardiness zone? And then you can use these to make seed transfer decisions. You can safely move within your seed zone. If you want to go one seed zone to your south for assisted migration, you can do that. You can use this map to find out where are those counties. And then you can call a state or go talk to folks in other states and know what counties they are. People know what county they're in, I've discovered. So that's why we did it this way. It's not the best map because it has political lines, but I don't care. It works for the nurseries and it works for seed collectors, so we're going with it. Pivoting, seed lot selection tool. This is a very cool, if you want to nerd out and find climate analogs, you can play with this. It's a lot of fun. You can put a pin on a map and you can pick some parameters like the seed lot climate, 61 to 1990, the planting site climate. You can pick your RCP 4.5. So for that point in Vermont, which turns out to be near where I live, if you want to do assisted migration, if you want to bring in some material from warmer locations that are still, within your future climate analog, go to southern Vermont. And it turns out this actually works pretty closely with the seed collection zone. So you can use this, or you can just go to the nearest hardiness zone 5 to 10 degrees to your south, and you'll get basically the same information. What this will tell you is these other weird places like the middle of the Adirondacks. I don't know. But it does, it's rough. It does not, it's species neutral. It does not care what species you're working with. So again, you have to interpret like where you can collect seed with care. And I point that out because if you're looking at red spruce, this is on that. You can click red spruce and it'll tell you the range of red spruce is that blue mass. But if you're looking for black walnut, not that you would do that, but hey, you never know. You got to go far away. There's no black walnut here. So that's what it's useful for. So I'm going to wrap up. So common questions. How do I know what species to plant? You can use the Climate Change Atlas. But most importantly, use your local knowledge. If you see the species on site, it's probably perfectly fine to plant, but you have to know the history of the site. It could be that somebody else planted it there and it was a bad idea. So know your site history, use your judgment, talk to a professional forester, use logic. Is there a problem relying on local seed sources? No. Use your local seed sources. If you have an opportunity to move some seed from southern Vermont or northern Massachusetts into your area, do some assisted migration. Great, but if you can't get it, don't overthink it. Use a good local seed source with as much genetic diversity as possible. That means don't collect it all from one tree in a cemetery. Collect it from maybe 10 trees in the cemetery, in a different cemetery. Move them around a bit. Get a good 10 to 20 trees in a seed lot is about as diverse as you need to get. Don't quote me on that. I'm looking for somewhere in the Forest Service, there's like a guide with a number. Is it 20? Is it 30? But if you can go 10 in a seed source and space them out a little bit, you're doing okay. Are there risks of moving them too far away? Yeah, there are risks. If it's moved from too warm of a hardiness zone, it might not handle your conditions. If you move it from the wrong place, it might not be competitive. But I think the most important part is it's really great to see Intervale. Develop a relationship with your nursery. We are in an Amazon culture where people just get on their phones and they order something and somebody brings it to their door. Like, it's just so easy to buy things online. Don't do that. Put the nurseries first. If you know you have a planting project, talk to your nursery. Hey, I got a planting project in a year or two. How do we do this? Do you have seed? You don't have seed? Can I get you seed? Can I send it to you? How long do you need? Is it a 1-year seedling or 2? Start these relationships early. Another thing in the Midwest that they do for these larger commercial purchasers is they tour the nursery. They see their seedlings in the ground. Like, they do a formal tour every year. I'm not saying we're going to do that at the Intervale, but it's okay to ask to see the stock before it's harvested and sold to you. Develop a working relationship with your nursery. Work with them. They want your business. They're doing their jobs. It's hard work, I know. That's a container nursery in New Jersey. But they love repeat customers. So continue to support your nurseries. Put them at the front of the conversation, not at the back. Not, oh, yeah, I need seedlings. You should have done that first. Okay, this is my last slide. So trees are pretty tough. They do have a lot of resilience to changing climates. They might need our help. I really think, though, the focus should be getting good stock types, good seedlings, good genetically diverse material. If you can get it from a warmer climate, great. If you can't, don't overthink it. Hardwoods tend to be more sensitive to seed transfer than conifers. Okay. Assisted migration is a great idea. 1 to 2 hardiness zones is all you need to go. Don't overthink it. 300 miles of the site is like a bookend, a top bookend. 100 to 200 is safe. Plan ahead. Work with your nurseries, support your nurseries. It's brutal work. I know, because I work with a lot of nurseries across my 20-state region. That's all I have. I will be here all day. I look forward to the nursery roundtable discussion later. So I'm sorry I don't have the books. I may run over to Spear Street and pick some up, maybe for the roundtable, because it's not that far. So that's all I have. Are there any questions?
How long do we have for questions, Sean?
We've got
5 minutes.
We're doing good.
We're doing good. All right. So give her lots of questions.
There's one over there. There's one over there.
Hi, thanks for your fascinating work. I'm just curious about, and this maybe is too ambitious for what you're doing, but is anyone looking into the sort of community associations of those trees? Like, and, Vermont has this natural community model, which is not replicated in other states, so it does make it difficult when you're crossing colonial borders to do this type of work. But because a lot of these trees' survival depends on the community of other trees and plants they're growing with in the mycorrhizal networks, I'm just curious if anyone's looking into that part of the transfer. Thanks.
I believe there is I believe some folks are doing some mycorrhizal research. It is an important feature of survival. But I tend to work at the point of like getting the seedlings to the ground and then letting nature take over. But I do believe there's research. I know in the southern pines, one of the nurseries I visited does inject them with mycorrhizae at the nursery. But there has been some research to show that it does come in, even after fumigating a seedling, when the beds get fumigated, when they're planted out, they still have a tendency to absorb whatever is local. Can that lead to successes or failures, depending on the mycorrhizae? Possibly. It is, I believe, an area of research. It's really hard to study roots in mycorrhizae. I think that's why we haven't had more research, but folks are getting better at it. And I do believe that that is an area of active research, but I tend to work just up to the point of getting it in the ground. So I don't personally know like how that factors. That would factor into a decision, though. If you're going to plant a mix of species, you want to make sure that they're compatible with the site. And I would consider that part of like being compatible to the site. I don't know if that helps. It's an important question. It's a hard one. Sometimes I do inject them at the nursery.
Hi there. So this is a plasticity question. So if I go out to a field and I see, typically it's going to be wet, heavy soils, and I see 4 of something, and one of them is clearly growing, showing a better growth form, more vigorous growth than the others. So that is plasticity. Is that right?
Yeah, it could be plasticity. It could be slightly different genetics. But more often, it could be something that microsite in that particular, where those roots are, for some reason, is slightly different. These soils can be very heterogeneous, so it could be either or both.
All right. So, but if I was collecting seeds, wouldn't I go to that one tree first? I want to hit these. I want to hit this tree for the seeds versus the other ones that are showing less vigorous growth.
So I would go to the tree that has the seeds on it, but genetically, like if you collected seeds from both those, they very likely share some of their ancestry. So it's not likely to be, like that's an example of like an ecotype. It was a small plant that was isolated from others. It may be genetically unique, but we find in trees is that there may be some genetic differences just because there's a lot of genetic variation among trees. It's not likely to be like an ecotype though.
Okay, thank you.
They get the pollen comes in from all over the place, and so the seeds that you collect has pollen from someplace else, and so it washes out any just distinct phenotypes or genotypes that might be on the site in that particular tree. But it's a great question. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you.
This is similar to Jess's question, and you probably have the same answer, but I guess one question or one concern that I would have in moving trees around is that same idea that there's an ecology that we need to be thinking about. And so do pollinators visit that? I mean, if it's a pollinated tree, that are those pollinators, do they recognize local trees more than trees that might be from elsewhere? And so would the seed set of a tree that's moved in, with genetics that's moved in, would that still get pollinated as well? Would it have the same seed set? Would it interact in a way that has that same function that we want?
Right. So I would say that's so this is the argument for using a relatively local seed source that's adapted to your climate envelope, because if it's already adapted to that, it'll likely be synchronized with what's already there. And so the issue is if you bring something from too far away, it may be out of sync, the flowers might come out later. The flowers might come out too early. The seeds might be set at, the pollination, the female flower and the pollen production may not be synchronized, and that's when you can get that sort of asynchrony, which is due to phenology, which is exactly the reason why you want to match your seed source to your current climate envelope, which is why, to me, you don't want, now I was at a meeting in the West, and the Washington DNR is not using local seed sources at all on Washington state land. And I got kind of called out on that because my theory is that you should mix. Like you should use your local seed sources and you should bring in some from an additional hardiness zone to increase the genetic diversity, but not rely entirely on it for that reason. Phenology is key for the pollinators, for seed set, for leaf drop in the fall, for getting ready for winter and time. And that relies on having seed sources that recognize your local climate, are synchronized with that local environment. But you can move farther than just that stand. The point is that the hardiness zones trees are very forgiving. They're tough. So you can move seed sources quite a distance, and they'll still be relatively, the phenology should be synchronized. But if you buy from a nursery that's lying to you, not that they do that, but if you have a really weird seed source, you may see it's like, whoa, what's going on here? It's not leafing out at the right time. Yeah, so that is possible, and that's why we do the seed zones, and that's why we pay attention and do our very best to get local seed sources and perhaps buffer them with southern seed sources of the same species, but not go too wildly far to get them. There's another question.
I was wondering, kind of on that note, what do you think about the potential of pollen-assisted migration?
You can't really do much. Nature is sort of doing that for us. So, yeah, you can't isolate from pollen. And with wind-pollinated conifers, like when we put in seed orchards, we just try to keep them like 500, quarter of a mile away from like the native. If you just want the seed to come, the pollen to come from within the orchard, it needs to be at least a quarter of a mile or half a mile away. We still know you're getting outside pollen. There have been some really cool studies recently with black walnut and Purdue where they were looking at like where the pollen comes from, but half of it comes from outside the orchard, even though the orchard is trying to be isolated. So you just can't control the pollen. So the pollen is helpful though, because it's blowing in and you just can't do anything about it.
I was wondering about like bringing in pollen from other populations.
Oh, you mean like if you're bringing in like a tree from far away, can you? Yeah, you can. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons. Yeah. That's one of the reasons you don't want to bring in seed sources from too far. Yes, because you're going to be introducing a pollen source that may not be desirable, and now you've got it out in the landscape. Yeah. So the White Oak Initiative, there was a big effort to plant white oak provenance progeny tests across the landscape. The geneticist was keenly aware of that. She did not want to introduce pollen that didn't belong, so she used our seed zones to make sure they were within a reasonable transfer distance. Yes, you can pollute. Yes, that is a concern that geneticists have, is polluting, pollen pollution.
Okay. So I have a question on scale and practicality. So, I mean, I know that you said it's like most important to mix, but if you're sort of making a planting plan for a site, I mean, how much are you thinking about trying to source like further southern adaptive material versus local material? And am I thinking about it like, we plant a lot of small sites, so if I've planted last year a site like half a mile away that I know has a lot of like local material, locally sourced material, and then I'm planting another site, can I be thinking that that site that I'm planting this year, maybe I'll bring some more like climate adapted species from farther south? Or like, should I be trying to incorporate it within like every site that we're planting?
I just think do the best you can with what you've got and
Okay.
don't overthink it. Yeah, trees are tough. They're very forgiving, and if you're making an effort, you do the seedlings that you can get access to, and if you can't get them, don't worry about it. But it's great if you can integrate it and keep an eye on it, because quite frankly, the research is still being done. Like, how much of a difference does it make? We don't know, but we just know trees are tough. You can move them quite far. They're very forgiving. They've survived glaciation. And so whatever you can do is great. Keep an eye on it and let us know how it goes. But I think, yeah, you can probably, if you can't mix them, just use local. If you can get a southern seed source that's still local and you trust native and you trust it on another site, go for it. Okay.
Oops. Thank you, Carrie. Yeah.